Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I will be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Today on the show, I've got another case study for you. This was one we dealt with recently at our shop. It was an interesting ride, but it was a 2019 Subaru Impreza, and this started at one of our customer shops, and they were having issues with the ABS unit on this one. We've done some ABS module stuff on these. I just had an episode recently on a Subaru with a ABS issue where it was the wrong one for the vehicle, and we've talked about the option model code and stuff like that, so that was actually pretty fresh on my mind. But this one was a little different. We were actually dealing with some communication codes on this one, some network codes, both in the ABS module and a few other modules, but not able to easily get to a solution on this one. And the ABS module had been replaced. Now, of course, the first thing I'm suspicious on these particular Subarus is whether or not the right ABS module was put in there, especially if it's a used one. But turns out, after doing some digging on this one, the ABS module that was in there not only matched the one that was coming out, but also was correct for the vehicle. So they actually did get the correct one. It already had the correct one in there, but both of them had the exact same issue. So that's what we'll be chasing here today, is the codes and the problem that this one had. So this was a network communication issue with codes in the ABS, or the VDC they call it. There was 4 primary codes that would set in the ABS: lost comm with the ECM, lost comm with the TCM, lost comm with the steering angle sensor, and lost comm with eyesight. And those were current hard fault codes. There were some other ones in history as well, but we did have some battery voltage issues, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And we had some other history codes in other modules because of that. But we also had codes setting in the electric power steering and the eyesight. So the ones in the eyesight said eyesight communication, parentheses, VDC, which is the ABS in this one, vehicle dynamics control, and eyesight communication, EPS, which is electric power steering. And then we had in electric power steering, eyesight system abnormal. Okay, so those were our hard fault codes, and between the codes and the ABS, the electric power steering, and the eyesight, the entire dash, lit up like a Christmas tree. And this is pretty consistent, can't really clear it out, but we've got those codes. So what I first am digging into here, and actually my guys helped me out quite a bit on this one, so I definitely want to give them credit, but I thought what was actually going on here was interesting, how we got there, and then why it was causing the codes that we had, and having an understanding of some of these codes and what they mean. I think that's all important and why it's worthwhile talking about on the podcast here. So in that ABS module, and we've got those lost communication codes. And if you look up the definitions of those codes, so that's like a U0100, a 101, a 126, and a U1235. Those are all actual, hey, I am the ABS and I lost communication with these other modules. And that is the definition. And there's a flow chart you can go through and everything, but it is the ABS saying I cannot talk to those modules, plain and simple. Now, if we go over to the eyesight and the power steering, it's a little different. So the eyesight it's a B28A2 and a B28A4, which says eyesight communication, and then in parentheses says VDC and EPS. Now, those are codes that you definitely need to actually look at the definition, because it is not just a straight up, hey, I lost communication with that module. If you look up these codes in service information, what it's saying first is there's a LAN check that it has you do. And if you go through, really all that's having you do is check communication with both the module that set the code, which if you got the code out, it probably communicates, but also the module it's setting the code for, right? So where it says eyesight communication VDC, I would check, can I communicate with the ABS module? And I can. And then same thing for the power steering. Can I communicate with the power steering? I can. Now it says eyesight system abnormal as far as a code in the power steering, but I can talk to it. Data stream codes, special functions, all of these modules, it's all there. All right. But here's the thing. If you continue to follow the code, right, it says check to make sure that you can talk to these modules. Okay. If you can, it says, are there codes set in these modules? And if yes, it says to diagnose those codes first. Okay. And that's a lot of network codes that we see that are like implausible or invalid data, which may even set as a U code. They didn't hear for the eyesight. That's Subaru's designation is it's a body code, but it says right there, eyesight communication. So if you're taking it for face value on the scan tool, you might think exactly like, hey, it's communication. But really what this is, there is codes or data that I'm getting from a module that I don't like. That module has a problem of some sort. Diagnose the code that is in that module. Okay, so if you're following this, you look and say, can I talk to the VDC and the EPS? Yes. Do they have codes? Yes. Diagnose those codes first and then come back to the eyesight. That's the order that you would go with this and the one that actually worked for this. So I have codes in the power steering and I have codes in the ABS. Now, the power steering says eyesight system abnormal. I am happy to have Automotive Seminars as a sponsor for the show. Now, if you're not familiar, Automotive Seminars is a diagnostic technician training company. They've got a website that there'll be a link to in the show notes. And what they offer is top-notch training to technicians like us in the field. I've been taking their training courses for years and have got a ton of benefit out of it. They've got top-notch instructors, John Thornton, Scott Shotton, Scott Manna, and every other month they've got a 2-night course that you can sign up for. Join in, ask questions, and afterwards, you've paid for the course, you can access a recorded version whenever you want. You can rewatch the class 2 years later in case you wanted some details on it. And that is a fantastic feature. So make sure to check out the website to see what courses they have available and what's coming up in the future. If you follow that code, it basically says, oh, there's a code in the eyesight module. Figure that one out. Okay, now if I just had the EPS code and then the eyesight code in the EPS, it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, but I also have the VDC code in the eyesight, which tells me to go to the VDC or the ABS. So right now I am right back to the ABS unit and I could kind of forget about the other codes, even though they say communication. I am focused on why do I have communication codes that are hard faults in my ABS module. Okay. Module's already been replaced. Now, something to consider here, the modules it says it can't talk to, the ECM, the TCM, the steering angle, and the eyesight, I can talk to all of them minus the steering angle sensor because it is not a module that actually talks directly to the scan tool. It shares data over the CAN bus, but you're not directly talking to it on this car. It does, however, live on the same bus. And in fact, all of these modules live on the same high-speed CAN bus for this vehicle. They all share the same bus. And I can talk to all of these modules on the high-speed bus using my scan tool, which is also hardwired onto the high-speed bus at pins 6 and 14 on the DLC. I can talk to all of them. And like the ECM and the TCM, they don't actually have codes saying that anything's wrong with communication. They're happy. Yes, we do have something in the eyesight, and I can't talk to the steering angle, but I can talk to everything else. And no one else is upset about the steering angle. That's the other thing. Like, I'm sure there's other modules, like the power steering, for instance, that use the steering angle data that comes onto the CAN bus. He's not setting any codes for that. So again, everything's pointing back to this ABS unit. And you can see why maybe it was replaced, because that doesn't quite make sense. So of course, the next natural place that you would go is to check powers and grounds at the module. So those were checked, and they were checked by a couple of my guys, and everything was there that was supposed to be there. Okay, so we actually have 3 power feeds into this module. 2 of them are constant and 1 of them is switched, and then it's got a ground going to it. So it's fairly straightforward. And we have the 2 CAN lines going in. Again, I can talk to this thing, but we have powers on all 3 power inputs. We have a ground on the ground, load test them with a headlight bulb. Looks good. Everything is there. You can scope the CAN bus, but again, it looks great. And here's the other thing, if you actually disconnect the ABS unit from the CAN bus, then a whole bunch of other people then set code saying, I can't talk to the ABS now. You get those communication codes. So like, even in the ECM, so clearly the thing is talking on the bus and other modules are observing it, but for some reason it is not happy. So what the clue ended up being here, and again, credit to one of my guys because he really picked this out as he was looking at it, was that when the codes would set in the ABS module actually mattered a lot for getting to the bottom of this one. So the codes for communication in that ABS module would only set on a key cycle, meaning that you would clear the codes, you would turn the key to the off position, and then you would turn it back on, and then the codes would reset at that point. If you just cleared the codes and you didn't cycle the key, you left it running, or you did like a really fast key cycle, the codes would not set. And the ABS was happy with everybody talking on the bus, and everybody was happy with the ABS, and you could clear all the codes, and it was it. And so what this indicated was something is happening during the key cycle. And what this clued my technician into is really paying attention to the power feeds, not just any power feed, but the switched power feeds. Is there a switched power feed that is staying on that has power when the key is in the off position? And that's actually exactly what he ended up finding, was that there is a yellow power feed which comes from an ignition relay in the BCM, which was receiving power when the key was in the off position. Okay, so this ignition 2 relay that's in the BCM normally feeds fuse number 10, which then feeds the ABS unit, among a couple of other components as well, but it feeds the ABS unit on this ignition feed. And it is supposed to turn off within about 5 seconds of turning the key off. That's normal operation. And the fuse that it feeds, you could go to, and it does what it's supposed to do. Approximately 5 seconds after turning the key off, there's no more power there. That's what it's supposed to do. But I still have power on the yellow wire at the ABS. That didn't make sense. Double check the diagrams. Something's, not adding up here. Well, what it was, someone did a repair to the circuit at some point or another, and it probably wasn't that long ago, where they tied in constant power to that yellow wire in the harness so that it was always on. And once we removed that, we found that there was an open somewhere between the ABS module and that yellow wire where it comes out of the BCM. And that was probably the original issue, is there was no power on this wire at all. they jumped constant power to it. And not only did it cause a battery drain, which would have been the other clue. And it's something to think about too. Like maybe you don't get to the solution picking up the clues that you would want to pick up. But sometimes if you notice there is a problem and at least has something to do, or maybe it's not even that clear that it does, you could follow that problem and you might get to the solution for everything, right? And it might even be a little bit of a stretch to say, like, I got a communication issue on this ABS module. There's a parasitic draw. Should I really follow the parasitic draw? If you have nothing else, it's something where like, well, I mean, it's an issue. It's killing the battery. Maybe it's related, maybe it's not. In this case, it would have led you to the same place because the ABS module was the thing that was staying awake. So the fix was just repairing this wire so that the switched ignition feed got to the ABS module where it was supposed to. And then it would actually power down the way it was supposed to. What was happening here was that the ABS module was staying awake, and in the off position for the key, the module was still reaching out to all of these other modules on the bus saying, hey, where'd you guys go? And then setting communication codes. And that's why we would get them on every key cycle, because the ABS module never fully went to sleep and it's looking for modules when everybody else is shut down because they're getting the power feed in the way that they're supposed to. Now, something else that's interesting about this is there are some networks on vehicles, and it seems to be mostly body CAN or body networks, although it's not 100% exclusive to this by any means. But there's a lot of networks that if you have traffic on that bus, you have somebody still talking and reaching out, nobody will go to sleep. Everybody will keep talking until that module actually goes to sleep. That was not the case on this Subaru. Now, was there anybody else talking on the high-speed bus? There might have been, but a series of modules at the very least shut down, even though the ABS was clearly still talking on the bus. The engine control, the TCM, the eyesight module, and then the steering angle all shut down correctly at when the key was off and stopped talking on the bus and stopped observing what was happening on the bus. And we don't see that all the time. There are body networks and CAN networks that will continue to talk or be able to talk as soon as there's any voltage fluctuation on the CAN line. And those are generally networks that need to operate when the key is off. In this particular case, with this high-speed CAN on this Subaru, that's not the way that they engineer it, at least for the modules that were actually shutting down. Basically, the logic there is, well, the key's off, we don't need to talk, which actually makes a lot of sense to me, but I get why certain modules and certain systems would need the ability to talk even with the key being in the off position. All depends on the network, the modules, the construction of the vehicle, but that's the way it ended up on this one. So we had communication codes that weren't really a network fault. Yes, was there a lack of communication between modules? For sure, but it's because of when the ABS was reaching out to the rest of the network. If you were to scope that network, you wouldn't see anything's wrong outside of the fact that there would have been activity long after the key was off. And maybe that's your clue. Maybe that's the way that you find it, is you're observing the CAN network after you shut the key off. There was different paths that someone could have taken to get to the solution on this one, but I find it interesting, the various types of communication and network codes that Ken set, and having a full understanding of how a particular module is reaching out onto the network to communicate with other modules and when, and being able to look at the systems dynamically like that. And honestly, the biggest clue on this was the when the codes would set versus when they would not. The key cycle was the big piece of information. And so you can play around with that a lot too with the vehicles that you work on, is trying to figure out, okay, when did these codes set, and does that tell me anything about what's going on? Will it, lead me to a different test because of the when of the codes? So something to look at for sure. And I thought this one was pretty interesting, and actually pretty happy with my guys that they got this figured out. I mean, for the most part, without a ton of input from me. I nudged and pushed a little bit here, but I was happy that they got this thing resolved, because this is definitely a strange one, man-made problem. Those sometimes are the worst, but we got to figure out those out too. So, anyways, I thought you would enjoy that case study. That's where I'm gonna wrap this one up. Thank you everybody for listening. I always appreciate it. With that out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.